Hello human beings, Power Gamer here, and when you think of the most powerful video game characters ever, who typically comes to mind? Kratos, Bayonetta, Sephiroth, Kirby, Dante, but one of these characters is nothing like the other. Can you guess which one it is? That's right, Sephiroth is the only villain.
Kirby, that's a name you should know. He's the star of the show. He's more than you think, he's got maximum pink. Kirby is indeed the one. Arguably one of the more surprising Nintendo mascots, Kirby has been a consistent hit despite being nothing more than a fat pink circle. But perhaps his simplicity is what makes people enjoy him. I mean, it certainly doesn't hurt that he's absolutely adorable.
I've been familiar with Kirby since I was a kid, but I wouldn't exactly call myself a massive fan. I've only played about 5 games in the series, and I only actually finished 2 of them, but I think it's time I gave the Pink Puff a real fair chance, starting with where it all began.
Kirby was created by Masahiro Sakurai, yes, the same one that would go on to make Super Smash Bros. Interestingly, his character design was originally a placeholder referred to as Po, but the developers liked him so much they decided to keep him for the full game. His name was later changed to Kirby after John Kirby, who was a lawyer that successfully defended Nintendo in 1981 after Universal tried to sue them for copyright infringement because they thought Donkey Kong was too similar to King Kong. Yes, Universal actually tried to sue Nintendo. Oh, how the times have changed. The game was developed by HAL Laboratory, who originally wanted to publish it independently, but they didn't have the funds necessary at the time, so they asked Nintendo to do it instead. There was actually some debate about what color Kirby should be, since Sakurai envisioned him as pink, but Shigeru Miyamoto thought he was yellow. Funny, because that initially didn't matter, since the game was developed for the Game Boy, which wasn't in color, which might explain why Kirby is white on the American box art. The game was designed to be something that anyone could fully play and enjoy, regardless of age or skill, so they had to focus on making a game that was simple enough for preschoolers, but also fun enough for adults. Kirby's Dream Land was released for the Game Boy on April 27th, 1992, and it was quite a commercial success, selling over 5 million copies worldwide. Reception was fairly positive upon release, and while that has slightly dwindled over time, people still regard this game as a classic. Kirby's Dream Land was followed up with a sequel titled Kirby's Adventure, released the following year, and would eventually turn into one of Nintendo's flagship franchises. While Kirby's not quite a console seller, he still has a passionate fanbase. Hell, the series even got an anime released in 2003. The original game was later included in Kirby's Dream Collection, which was released for the Wii in 2012 as a celebration of Kirby's 20th anniversary.
And the Dream Collection is how I'm going to be playing it, since it's actually a really awesome compilation. I'm sure Kirby's working up quite an appetite, so let's get to it.
Kirby's Dream Land takes place in the world of Dreamland.
You don't say!
A country located on planet Popstar, which is literally a giant star. The nefarious King Dedede has stolen all of the food in Dreamland, as well as the magical sparkling stars, which, honestly, I don't know what they do. They're magic. They're just magic. That's all you really need, apparently. So, a little round guy who can eat anything named Kirby decides to get him back. And it's basically the same thing as all the other early Nintendo games. A villain does something bad, hero must go stop them. The graphics for this game are actually really impressive. For the Game Boy, there is a surprising amount of detail. The environments and enemies look really good, and Kirby has some pretty fluid animation. It's crazy they were able to make something look this good for such a limited system. The music is, about the same as most Game Boy games. Well composed, but also very limited. The game is a 2D side-scroller. Move right, kill enemies, do some jumping. Kirby's primary method of defense is by inhaling enemies like a vacuum. You can then either press the attack button again to spit the enemy back out as a star, or you can press down on the D-pad to swallow them whole. Yep, it doesn't matter how big the enemy is, Kirby can wolf them down in one single gulp. When I said he can eat anything, I wasn't kidding. Okay, there's a couple of things he can't eat, like these spike balls, but other than that, Kirby will devour anything in sight. And not just because of his appetite, that is the only way to deal with enemies in this game. You have 2 attacks, and that's pretty much it. Well, sort of. If you press up on the D-pad, Kirby will inflate himself with air. Wow, that's 2 games back-to-back that involve inflation. Doing this allows Kirby to float over anything. Once he's done, he spits out the air as another form of attack. A different method, but it still does the same thing as spitting out enemies. The floating's real purpose comes from the platforming, or should I say, lack of platforming. Kirby can float infinitely, so unless there's an enemy or a hazard above, you are very unlikely to fall into any pits. Like I said earlier, this game was designed so that anybody could play it, so Kirby's floating ability was added as a way of giving younger kids a way to easily go through this game. A nice touch, don't get me wrong, but it can make a lot of the challenge non-existent.
The main challenge for this game comes from avoiding obstacles and enemies, and even then, that's not exactly that taxing.
Most of the enemies go down in just 1 hit, and while some of the obstacles can be a little tricky, you shouldn't have too many parts you get stuck on. Kirby has 6 health points, and getting hit takes away 1. If you die, you lose a life and go back to your last checkpoint. You can find pieces of food to restore your health, with the best one being these Maxim tomatoes that give you full restoration. There's a couple of things that can cause trouble, like these spikes that take away half of your life, or these enemies you can't inhale because they explode, but for the most part, you'll breeze through almost everything. Don't believe me? I managed to get through 99% of this game without getting a single game over. Now, a game doesn't need to be hard in order to be fun. Sometimes you want a cozy game you can just zone out to, but I think Kirby's Dream Land goes a little too far because of how simple it is. There's not that much variety here. There's only 5 levels in the entire game, and they each have a little cutscene introducing them, which, yeah, this is adorable. Green Greens, a forest level, Castle Low, a castle level, Floating Islands, a beach level, Bubbly Clouds, a sky level, and Mount Dedede, which I'll get into later. The levels all feel pretty similar, but thankfully it's not just a straight shot to the end. Most of them are pretty non-linear and require you to go in various doors to take alternate paths, and some of the paths hide secrets like extra lives and power-ups. Sure, it's nothing crazy, but it does help make the game a little more interesting. When you finish a level, you grab a sparkly star and get this adorable little dance set to a jingle so happy it is impossible to not dance along. There's a handful of power-ups, but they're not very common. There's these star blocks you can inhale, essentially serving as an enemy that won't hurt you. You got this microphone that you can spit out, which causes Kirby to screech, nuking everything on screen. Make sure you don't invite him to karaoke night. Curry, which lets him spit fireballs, essentially unlimited star blasts for a short amount of time. Bombs, which kaboom. And the sweet potato, which super inflates Kirby, giving him infinite air blasts. Each level ends with a boss fight, and they're nothing spectacular. Green Greens, you fight this tree named Wispy Woods. Don't really understand how a tree can cause any harm, but I don't know, maybe some kind of cosmic entity will destroy us with all his roots or something. He drops apples on you and you have to inhale them and spit them back out. Honestly, that's pretty much how every boss works. Wait for them to attack you, inhale, spit. He also blows air at you, but that's not that big a deal. Next is Low and La, 2 blob things that are actually based off of a pre-existing game called The Adventures of Lolo. Don't know where the extra low came from. You push blocks in the game and they push blocks here. You need to either spit before they touch you or go behind them, but it's completely random which one of these doors they pop out of. Floating Islands has a blimp named Kabula. You have to eat a sweet potato, and here the game essentially becomes a 2D shooter. I guess Game Boy games just had a thing for that. And in Floating Clouds, we find Krako, which sounds like the host of a TV show your parents wouldn't let you watch. It's a cloud with spikes and a large eye, and it's the first time the game has any real semblance of difficulty. He floats around, shoots lasers, and you can only hurt him when he drops an enemy. If you figure out the pattern, the only thing you have to worry about is the swoop attack. I swear it is impossible to avoid both this and the laser that comes immediately after it. But now we've made it to Mount Dedede, and this level is just a boss rush that also has mini versions of the previous levels.
Because I just feel so nostalgic for the levels I played 20 minutes ago.
But thankfully, if you die, you don't have to fight the bosses all over again. Once you beat them all, we take it to the king. Dedede puts you in a wrestling ring and tries to clobber you with his hammer. He also jumps around, steals your thing by inhaling you, and just trips. You have to wait for him to clobber or jump and then inhale the star that pops out. It's kind of an underwhelming fight, but hey, this is where I got my only game over, and it just put me right back at the final boss, so at least the game is fair with that. When you finally take him out, Kirby sends him flying into the stratosphere and uses the sparkling stars to turn himself into a hot air balloon. He then hijacks Dedede's entire castle and flies it down to give the people of Dreamland back their food. And that's the end of the game. Or is it? Upon beating the game, you're given a cheat code. If you hold up, select, and the jump button on the title screen, you unlock Extra Mode, which is essentially this game's hard mode. There's tons of enemies, and they're a lot more aggressive. Plus, the boss fights have new strategies that you have to deal with. If you thought the main game was too easy, this is definitely the mode for you, which I think is a good way of giving people who want a challenge, yeah, an actual challenge, but it sadly doesn't make the game any less simple. And you don't actually get anything for beating it, so yeah, I think I've had enough.
Dreamland isn't a bad game, but it's nothing groundbreaking either. It's like a lot of first entries in long-running video game series. It took a while to find its footing, but ironically, this game suffers from the opposite problem that others tend to have.
Games like Sonic, Crash, and Mega Man can be pretty frustrating with their first entries, but here the problem is that it's too simple. There is extra mode, yeah, but that doesn't make the game any more complex, it just makes the game harder. I did enjoy playing this game, but it's not something I see myself going back to. It takes less than 40 minutes to finish this game, so it's not an awful way to kill some time, but you're probably better off with something else.
If you're looking to get into the Kirby series, I think you have better places to start, like Kirby's Adventure on the NES or Nightmare in Dreamland on the Game Boy Advance. I feel like I can only really recommend this game to people who already love Kirby and want to see where the series got its start. But you know what? I'm sick of everything being too easy in my life, so I need a real challenge. I'm going to climb a mountain! Ugh. I didn't even make it to the mountain, I just slipped on an ice cube.